I wasn't even aware that storytelling, or I'm a poet as well, or poetry, or these things could even be a thing.
You should either do something in business or you should pursue medicine or engineering.
Oh, absolutely. I hated it the week I started. I worked at it for like 7 years.
What exactly pushed you to that moment?
I first tried to establish a career as a dancer. Big failure.
You just jump into it when you're not ready to pursue something.
Yeah, please, God forbid, do not follow your dreams. Don't just like jump into them.
Hello everyone, welcome to today's episode of the Ramsha Podcast. Today we have an incredibly talented and inspiring Jitesh Jaggi, a storyteller. His journey is so interesting because he left his finance career to pursue storytelling full-time, which is incredibly inspiring, and not many people have the courage to do this. A 5-time Moth award-winning storyteller, Jitesh has performed in multiple Chicago theaters from Second City to Stephen Wolf, sharing his heartfelt immigrant experiences. In this episode, we explore Jitesh's journey from corporate life to the stage, the art of storytelling, and how sharing stories can really bridge barriers and help create meaningful connections. So Jitesh, it is a pleasure having you. Really excited to talk to you about your experiences and what you have done so far. But first, tell me, how are you doing?
I'm doing wonderful. Thank you so much for having me here, and that was a great intro. Thank you.
Thank you for being here. Really appreciate it. So, we'll begin with your childhood. I actually want to know everything about your childhood. Your parents, are you an only child? Do you have siblings? Just take me back to your childhood days.
Yeah, I was born in a big joint family. My dad has like 5 brothers, 2 sisters. They were all married. Everybody was having kids. I was one of them. My grandma, my grandpa, plus the regular folks just coming in and out of the house. So I grew up in what looked like a market. It was a crowded and very lively household. I really loved it. And when I was maybe like 5 or 6, my dad and my mom were like, we gotta have our own space. So that's when we moved a little bit out of the area that I was born in. I have an elder sister. So I was very coddled, and I was very much loved as a baby because, I was this cute little chubby child. Even as a young boy, like I was very aware that I had a sense of humor. I could draw people's attention. I could entertain them. I could tell them stories and things like that. Things that came to bear later in my career.
No, that's awesome. So you mentioned that you always knew that you had the talent, to draw people's attention in a good way, right? You had great sense of humor. So, pursuing storytelling, right? Is that something that you knew from childhood, that okay, yes, this is what I'll do, or what did that come much later in your life?
Yeah, I mean, I wasn't even aware that storytelling, or I'm a poet as well, or poetry, or these things could even be a thing, let alone a career. I just knew that I was good at like identifying patterns and putting things together and surprising people and narrating an incident in a way that would make them listen. That's all I knew. And if I would hear other people telling a good story, I was very aware of that, and I would like store it in the back of my head, like, ooh, like I like what this person did there. I like how they made people laugh. I like how they introduced suspense in here, I didn't know that this was going to be a career ever, even while I was doing it. Only when I came to the US, to Chicago, I basically stumbled onto it. I saw people doing things on stages and things like that, and I was like, oh my God, so the thing that I've been doing all my life for free, I could do this sometimes still for free, but I could actually do it as an art form. I could practice it as a craft. That's when the shift happened.
I find it very interesting when you mentioned that you knew that this is something you can pursue, like this is something that you like, but you never thought of this as a professional career. And I think a lot of it is because, from childhood, we are kind of told that you should either do something in business or you should pursue medicine or engineering. And those are sometimes the only options that we have in front of us. And we just feel that, okay, this is maybe what's best for me. But when you go into it, then you're like, okay, what did I just do? This is something I never wanted to do. So do you feel the same thing happened with you?
Absolutely. I mean, no child says when you ask them, like, what do you want to do when you grow up? Nobody says, like, oh, I want to be an insurance adjuster, or I dream of being a clerk at a business processing outsourcing unit. Like, it's so much in our nature to be drawn to careers, and forget careers, to be drawn to things that connect us to other people, even as children,
Yeah.
right? Even for kids that are very introverted, they have their own way of connecting to others through drawing or writing or whatever it might be. So I just knew that I am I get excited about connecting with people. I knew that I liked talking to people. I liked collecting stories, and I liked relaying them to others, and I liked combining and finding myself somewhere in there. I liked words. I just didn't know that a career like that existed. So the careers that were proposed to me as a child were your typical doctor, lawyer,
Engineer.
engineer, banker, things like that. So I felt I had to pick from one of these options.
And just picked the one that seemed better to you.
It was pick the one that was most convenient, that would get me
A good job.
good job out of the neighborhood I grew up in, basically.
So you were working in a bank, I believe, right? Okay.
It was an investment bank.
An investment.
With quotation marks, I'll explain. Yeah.
And I think you hated your job. Is that true?
Oh, absolutely. I hated it the week I started. I worked at it for like 7 years, but I knew that was
7 years.
Yep. I mean, like, we grew up very, very poor, and you give that child some cash and tell them to do something. Even if they hate it, they're going to do it for a few years, like, before I could feel like, okay, now I can take the jump. I mean, there never will be a perfect time for you to take a jump. I knew that. So maybe because of that reason, I kept procrastinating. I kept pushing the date. But 7 years was how long I was in that industry.
I honestly feel that it takes a lot of courage to leave something that's paying you well, even if you hate it, like you mentioned, right? It still takes a lot of courage, because let's just admit this, that we need money. We need money to survive. We need money to support our families, to support even our own dreams. And it can be honestly impossible to sustain without money, right? So when you were in that position, or when you made that mindset that, okay, I don't want to continue this anymore, right? What exactly pushed you to that moment?
I had always known that this was not, career in finance was not for me. Nothing against folks who are, the many people who are in finance. It's a admirable industry, and I know a lot of friends who work there, and I love them, but it wasn't for me. I knew that. It wasn't utilizing everything that I had to offer the world, everything that I knew I could be happy doing. So, but where does that get you? Like, I'm sitting here in this job knowing in my heart for sure this is not for me. So all I'm doing is stewing on, like, possible outcomes. The problem was there wasn't anything else that I was good at. I didn't know what else could be an alternative, right? Again, just like as a child, the alternatives presented to me were being a lawyer, being a doctor, and the big capital letter professions, as I call them. Nobody was telling me you could be a poet, you could be a storyteller. So I had to just, like, try my luck. And there was an instant that threw me over the edge.
What was that?
I was just telling myself, like, because I can't bring myself to quit the job myself, something external has to happen to me. And I will take this as a sign from the universe that this is the time. And it was like an unfortunate event, really. I was working at my job, and we used to work on Excel sheets a lot. And there was this one day and this would happen a lot where I was working. There was this power outage, and yes, they had, like, backup generators and everything, but for the moment, everything blew, right? Like, our screens went blank, and not just me, we work on this huge floor, and the screens just go out. And when the screens come back, everybody's like, oh, cool, we'll just continue working as if nothing happened. But for me, one is the thing that I was working on, I just didn't save it. So I was
You
like,
lost all the data.
I lost everything, and I was like, oh man, like already not enjoying working on this report. And to begin again, where do you get the motivation from it? I took that as a sign from the universe, like, oh, look, this is happening for a reason. I could have said to myself, like, oh, I could see the color yellow this morning. And if I see the color yellow, I'm quitting my job. It wasn't about me losing the data, but I took that as a sign from the universe. I was like, this is it. I just put in my papers and I was like, never looking back again.
No, I must like appreciate you for this because not many people can do that. Like I know so many people who are stuck doing something they hate, but then there's just so much pressure that yes, they have from family, but also I feel that a lot of people tend to just pressurize themselves to an extent that they just want to keep pushing themselves to do something they hate, and they just keep doing it every day, every year, and then they end up getting really frustrated, with themselves, with people around them, which is really unfortunate. So I think what you did is very inspiring. So now I would love to know more about what was that moment, right, when you just said to yourself that I want to pursue a professional career in storytelling. What was that moment like?
It obviously wasn't like a straight line. While I was working in finance and these dead-end jobs in investment banks, and investment banks in the US are different from investment banks in India, right? Investment banks there means that do the things that investment banks in America don't want to do. So we will do in America, all in the USA, all the fun stuff of making deals, and the paperwork and the boring stuff, let's outsource to investment banks in India and places like that. So it was the the reject work that people didn't want to do, which we were doing. So it wasn't as glamorous as when you hear the term investment bank. It was, we were investing anything. So while I was working this for 7 years, I wanted a creative outlet because this was soul crushing work. So on the side, I started to look for some creative expression. I was never an artist. I didn't know a single living artist. Nobody in my family was an artist. So I had to just like figure out what is going to be my means of expression. Interestingly enough, dance came about my life, and I became, interestingly enough, I became a break dancer. B-boying or breaking, as the term is officially, was not popular. The internet had just arrived, at least in my home in 2008. And that's when I was like, oh, what are these people doing in these music videos? So I started to copy them, to emulate them in my little bedroom. I started practicing, and then that was my thing. I was this nerdy, shy little kid who was showing up at his day job and then coming home and practicing by himself, dancing by himself. That became a thing, and then poetry became a thing. So movement and words, they were the same thing, really. I was just trying to utilize the gifts that I had, or I was just trying to express what I had. I wasn't a good dancer, I wasn't a good poet. I just wanted to do something. I wanted to use my brain, my heart, because my job wasn't doing that. So I first tried to establish a career as a dancer. Big failure. There weren't jobs as a break dancer in India in early 2000s, as you can imagine that. So I also want to like let people know who are hearing this, it's not just going to happen like you're working this job that you don't like and you're going to jump into this paradise. It doesn't work like that. You have to figure out your pace. You have to figure out what is it that'll accept you, So I tried to do that, didn't work. Then I tried to work as a writer because I was like, I write poetry and that could be a thing. That started to work a little bit. I had gigs as a freelance writer, but they weren't gigs that I had expected. I was writing a lot about shampoos and humidifiers, not creative writing, because I had to pay the bills still. So I was writing for websites, I was writing for companies, I was writing for advertisers. It became another job. So I was like, what is it that I want for my life, man? Only when I moved here in America, in Chicago, did I found the stage. Did I find like, oh, you could write stories about your life and you could perform them, and people will pay you for that sometimes if you're good at it. And you could teach people how to tell their stories. That's when the dial started to like move. But that was another 5 years of experimenting. After 7 years of working a job that I didn't like, it took me 4 or 5 years more of experimenting with different things and having jobs on the side, um, to come to being a storyteller.
You know, what I find so fascinating, so two things, right? First lesson that I derived from your answer is that it's all about experimenting,
Oh, yeah.
because you don't know what's going to work for you, right? So like when you started, you did not know that you'll be here. You did not know that you'll be performing in all these theaters and sharing your stories, which is amazing. But uh, you got to this point because you kept experimenting. You did not let failure define you. And I think what a lot of us do, including myself, is that when we face a failure, and a failure can be of any kind, you know, it can be financial, emotional, whatever failure, we take that as a huge setback and we just stop right then and there. So it is really important to keep trying, you know, to keep experimenting with different things. Second thing that I really liked about your whole answer and your story is, you know, it's about finding the right balance, because yes, passions are important, and you know, they're important for our mental health, for our emotional health, but they don't always give us money, especially
Yeah.
when we're starting out. So one thing I really liked about what you did basically was you tried creating a balance. So you did not leave your job in the beginning, you know, you tried balancing things, but then I think at one point of time you just have to take that leap of faith and go
For
all
sure.
out there. You spoke about you know, how you went when you came to Chicago. That was when you saw that you can pursue storytelling as a full-time career, and you can go to these different theaters and tell your stories, which is amazing. But a big part of it is also like, you know, when you're transitioning from a city like Mumbai or a country like India to US, that comes with its own set of challenges. So how is that transition?
Yeah, no, that's a good question. Like, not only was I changing careers, I was changing my entire life. I was uprooting myself from my hometown. I have only lived in Mumbai. I have never lived anywhere else. I've traveled quite a bit, but that has been my base, my foundation. And then I come into this new city, this new country. Of course, I speak the language, but you know, it's the customs are different. I didn't know what I didn't know, and I didn't know a lot of. I didn't know how to like manage my day to day life. Uh, I didn't know how to like get a card to get on the bus. I didn't know how to order a coffee. Like I knew technically, but I didn't have the confidence for putting myself out there. So that itself was a struggle for sure while going through a career crisis. But looking back, interestingly, that gave me better stories to tell. That fish out of water experience, or because I was in Chicago, I call it a fish out of water and straight into the deep freezer experience, that gave me a lot of interesting things to talk about to people who don't know what the immigrant experience really feels like. And a lot of immigrants, they don't know how to voice that experience. You know what I mean? So we just live with it. For me to voice that experience, for me to craft that into this art form and relay that in terms of stories and poems, I think that was interesting for people, meaningful for people to listen to, and it was very cathartic for me to process. This is art became my way to process my life changes, not just a way to package something that I could sell people. You know what I mean? This is something that all the things that I've done to make a career, I want you to know that I was already doing those things for myself. That is if you want to take one thing from this interview, take this. I was already doing these things for myself. I was writing stories, I was writing poems to make sense of my life and where my life is heading. It became an afterthought that others might also be interested in this and they might pay me some money to be able to do that for them. But I was doing it for myself anyway.
So don't just do something big for the money, right? Do it for yourself. Do something that gives you happiness and satisfaction. And then eventually things will happen if you plan strategically and you take the right steps.
Yeah, there's this quote by comedian actor Steve Martin. He says, and because he has also like tried different careers before he became like a successful comedian, and he said some, I'm paraphrasing right now, but he said something to the effect of, be too good to ignore, be so good at what you do that people can't ignore you. And that is so poignant. Like, yes, follow your passion, but that's like empty advice. What if my passion is so eccentric and so, niche that nobody even knows that I'm doing it, locked in my house? But if you really put your passion to use and you really pour yourself into that passion, pour your abilities and apply yourself and put it out there, you can get to a point that you're so good that people can't ignore you. People who don't know, for example, what storytelling is, even before my show, sometimes I have to explain people what storytelling is, because people think that it's like made up stories. No, these are stories about my life. And I had to become so good that people started giving me some attention for like, what is this thing? I heard him on the radio. I saw his interview on TV. Like, what is this thing? I should go buy a ticket to his show. And they didn't regret doing that. You know what I mean? So what I'm trying to get at is that following your passion is a good advice, but it's not complete advice.
It's a very incomplete advice.
Exactly. It leads people astray.
Yeah. It's like, follow your passions, but okay, how? What do I?
Yeah, please, God forbid, do not follow your dreams. Don't just like jump into them. Get good at what you do. So much so that it becomes a career on its own. You know what I mean? Pursue opportunities that are adjacent to your dreams. That is concrete advice, not just like follow your dreams. That's movie stuff,
That is actually so true, because I know so many people, and even I'm guilty of doing something similar, that you just jump into it when you're not ready to pursue something. And it's like, okay, if I'm doing something unconventional, but I need money, right? I need to survive. So someone has to pay me. Someone has to hire me to do that work, or, to follow that path. But then if I'm not good at it, then why would someone pay me?
Exactly.
Right? I need to be a certain way. I need to have that confidence. I need to be good at what I'm doing. And I think that confidence comes from knowing your shit, basically, knowing what you have, what you're going to be pursuing. I want to backtrack a bit. So you spoke about, your transition from Mumbai to Chicago and how it was challenging, which is true. And I get how that can be challenging. But I feel that, there are a lot of people who are making a similar transition, and they go into two extreme sides, right? There's one side that's like, they forget all their values and they completely embrace the new culture, which is also wrong, because you are neglecting your beliefs and values that you have been around and that you grew up with. And then there is that other extreme side, which is like people who are very tightly holding on to their beliefs, and they're not ready to accept and embrace new culture. What I like about your story and what you have done is I believe you have tried balancing the two, because in order for you to be a good storyteller, you need to be connected with your roots and where you came from, right? But then at the same time, you need to find ways to connect with your audience who might or might not understand those stories. So how did you strike that balance?
That's an excellent question. I'm glad you paraphrased the way you did, because I want to start with first empathizing with people on both extremes. One is, I understand when you come to this country kind of like there's cues everywhere that make you want to assimilate, that make you want to completely fit in and be completely American. And if you give into those cues, they will take you there. And I also understand the fear of like, oh my God, like I only know one way of life. Like I can't change, because then, like it's an abyss. Then what do I do? Like I need to hold on to my tradition, my custom. And then you lose out on all the benefits that this multicultural city and country have to offer. And that's not going to benefit you either. So there's no right or wrong way, but I definitely empathize with both extremes, and I gently, warmly invite people on both extremes to like, come find your balance. There is not a balance, there is only your balance, Find a way to be a part of the surrounding that you're in and find a way to bring your past, bring your tradition, carry it with you. And I do that by telling stories of me and my people. I make sure to represent where I come from. I come from this very little space, something that I learned, a neighborhood that I learned was a refugee camp, a Punjabi camp where I was born. I bring that camp, those people with me when I'm telling these stories. But I'm very highly aware that my audience is American. Sometimes Indian Americans, but also Ukrainian Americans, also Mexican Americans. I make sure to cater to them by not completely assimilating to them, but also by serving them, by showing them where I come from and making it easy for them to understand and grasp onto. Does that make sense?
No, that makes a lot of sense. And you mentioned that a big part of it is getting attention from audience
Yeah.
who are Americans, and just like not just Americans, but not just white Americans, but
Oh, yeah.
from different backgrounds and races, and they might not understand a lot of those struggles and a lot of those stories, right? So how do you craft your stories in a way that it is universal and that everyone can relate to them one way or the other?
That's a great question. Another good question. 10 out of 10. That's a good question because the answer I have been very searching myself and I've been very acutely aware about. Artists, a lot of people, startups, business entrepreneurs, they try to make their product or their offering as graspable, grabbable to everybody as possible. You try to appeal to the masses, to the lowest common denominator. And I don't think that's the wisest move. I don't think that you should serve everybody. Somehow, the more specific your product, your story, your offering is to you, the more peculiar, the more particular, the more specific it is to where you come from and who you are, the more universal it is for everybody. I give you an example. I told you already about my origins as a b-boy, as a breakdancer. That was because we were obsessed with hip-hop culture. As soon as the internet arrived, that was the first culture that took over, at least from where I come from, in my neighborhood. And we were listening to songs by rappers like Tupac Shakur. And I have, as a kid, growing up in Mumbai, should have nothing to do with this guy rapping about his life in Compton or in LA. I don't know that neighborhood. I don't know that life. But somehow everything this man is rapping about, it just goes straight to the heart. And we relate to it. And we start rapping and we start singing these lyrics. If Tupac would have tried to appeal to somebody in Mumbai, maybe we would have been like, yeah. But because he was rapping so hyper specific to his environment, we were able to relate to it and we were able to pour our background into his background and meet somewhere in the middle. What I'm trying to get at is, I still can't fully explain it, but the more specific you are, the more you latch onto your identity and where you come from, the more people are like, oh my God, I fully relate to this. And I think the reason is because when you talk about your story, people are not really listening to the specifics of it. People are listening to the underlying themes of it. When I'm sharing my story about growing up in this corner of Mumbai, people are hearing that. But what they're really listening to is the themes of belonging, the themes of longing, the themes of not fitting in. And anybody in America, in Pakistan, in Ukraine, in Russia, in France can relate to these themes. You know what I'm trying to get at? I can give an example of my solo show. I did a one-man show called Suitcase Stories.
Yeah,
that was at the
I heard a lot about it.
Thank you. That was at the Steppenwolf at Second City. That show is 90 minutes long. People's attention spans are 6 minutes. Most stories, even in storytelling events, or most stand-up comedy, or most poetry events will have 3 to 6 minutes. You know what I mean? So, and that makes sense. YouTube videos are that span also, that duration as well. To have a 90-minute show and to have nobody leave until the end. I've had people coming up to me and be like, how long was that? Because that felt like 30 minutes or 40 minutes. I was like, nope, you were here for 90 minutes, sir. And y- of course, the story, the offering has to be strong. But what I wanted to do is, one is I didn't want to dilute my story. I wasn't going to give them a Cliff Notes version, a summary of my story. I was going to get in deep. I was going to get into deep into like my experience of experiencing winter for the first time. I was going to like connect these different threads of my upbringing and my love life and my career. I was going to like tell these stories. I was going to build and create a world in the beginning of the show. And at the end of the show, I was going to bring all these different worlds together. I was going to give the audience the satisfaction of scratching that itch of like, oh my God, everything is coming together like a puzzle, right? That takes time. So for 90 minutes, how do you keep people at the edge of their seats? For me, and this relates to what we talked about before, I had to tap into my other skills that I had developed in my past, the failed careers of a writer, of a dancer, of a poet. All of that had to come to bear as a storyteller, as a teacher as well. I was teaching at one point. I still teach, and what that means is, at one point, I tell stories by using my words. I'm a spoken word artist. And at one point, when the story comes to a difficult bend, I stop telling that story with my words. I jump into this movement, this dance segment. And I'm not dancing as a showcase. I'm telling my story with my body now, not with my words. It's a movement based storytelling. And I stop that and I tell the story with my words again. And I never explain that gap. And people always understand what I conveyed with my body. Similarly, I stop telling stories and I start jump into poetry segment. I stop stories with my words, and I start acting out stories as if the event is unfolding live right now on the stage. You know what I mean? So there are different ways of using acting, using poetry, using dancing. These are the skills that I have. For example, a skill that I don't have is singing. If you're a good singer, you could use that. So what I'm trying to say is like, all the things that you spend time pursuing, don't
Nothing goes to waste.
nothing goes to waste. There is a way for you to like use all of that in the thing that does work. Storytelling is the thing that did work for me. The other things that didn't work as a career, I could like tie them into my storytelling and make it a fully complete, almost like a multimedia, multimodal event by myself, just a solo person.
Even finance, for instance, right? I think it made you probably become more detail oriented,
Oh,
which
absolutely.
again is a skill that you need for doing something like this.
Yeah.
So this is not part of my questions,
Uh-huh.
but I love throwing challenges and
Yeah.
I love surprising. So
Yeah.
here's my challenge question.
Okay. Oh, now is the challenge question. Okay.
Okay, so imagine that I am completely new to this field, right? For instance, I am your client. Just imagine, and I want to pursue storytelling, and I have a lot of stories to tell. From facing and tackling depression, anxiety, to having suicidal thoughts. To facing harassment and bullying. If I was your client and I have so many different stories to tell, what advice will you give me and how will you coach me?
Yeah, that is a challenge question. Luckily, that's what I do. I teach storytelling, and I don't teach storytelling only to storytellers. Of course, there's that. But when I'm teaching storytelling, I'm trying to tell people like, hey, there is a way for you to tell better stories at work, in your personal life. There is a way to become a better storyteller, and you don't have to be an artist to be able to get the benefit of telling better stories. You can use that benefit. When I teach people, they are often learning how to tell better stories to pitch a business proposal, to pitch to their bosses, to pitch an idea to their supervisor or their investors, to the media. They're trying to pitch a better idea to their spouse, or just to be a better story, an overall interesting narrator of events. Often people will learn storytelling from me just to be able to process what happened to them. And that's such a valid reason to do that. So often, take your example, people will come to me and be like, okay, this traumatic incident happened to me. How do I, and I feel like to put my story into words will help me to process it. How do I go about that? And to them, and I want to first give a caveat that I'm not a therapist. You have to have that taken care of on the side, or in fact foremost, right? Storytelling is not a replacement for therapy. It is therapeutic. You know what I mean? It's not therapy. So that I will never step onto those boundaries. That needs to be taken care of. That being said, there are so many therapeutic qualities to telling your story. It's so powerful. It's so empowering to be able to stand strong and stand tall and be like, this happened to me. I'm going to own this, and I'm going to be able to convey it without faltering, without shaking. And I'm going to own this part of my life. And I'm not going to be ashamed about it. You telling your story doesn't just mean to entertain somebody. It means I am owning this. I'm not ashamed of it anymore. To those folks who come to me with a very difficult past, I basically get them to first jog their memory and face the events that happened to them. And first we build this empathy. Like, hey, I am not listening to your story as an outsider. I am listening to your story as if it happened to me. I'm going to sit in this story. I'm going to sit in your story, and I'm going to live it with you. And then we will start to break it down into small, manageable chunks, and we are going to write about them. Where did it begin? Who is the kind of person who this happened to? And what is the kind of person that made you? You know what I mean? What's the arc? What's the hero's arc? What's the hero's journey? Imagine for a moment that you are the hero. Where did that story leave you? There has to be a change. So who were you before? Who were you during this event? And who did you become after experiencing that event of bullying, for example? So that is my process of taking them through it. There's a lot of writing, there's a lot of dialogue, and there's a lot of practicing your story. That's not fake. That is important part of owning your story. You have to practice telling your story for your subconscious to really accept this is what happened to me. It's not my fault, and I own it completely, and it made me a better person today.
So first, and just to give a recap, right? The first step is actually accepting and opening up about that story or those experiences. Then comes a lot of back and forth dialogue, writing the story from start to finish, defining, going in detail regarding what happened, why did it happen, how did it happen, right? From start to finish. And then a lot of practice, because practice is what gives you the confidence to perform. This is amazing. And, this brings me to my next question, which is, I see a lot of people who are great on camera, or, who are great while having one-on-one conversations.
Right.
But then when they're in front of a large crowd, when they're on stage, they get nervous, which is really obvious, and it happens to the best of us, right? But with you having performed in so many different places, doing so many different stories, right? How do you control that stage fright? How do you calm yourself down? Because I'm sure you must also, feel nervous.
Yeah, you're asking if I'm human. Yes, the answer is yes. There are two things that come to mind. One is feeling the fear, feeling the emotions, feeling the anxiety, feeling the nervousness, and not trying so hard to push that away, because that becomes a problem in itself. When we are trying to resist the very natural emotions of anxiety and nervousness, that becomes a problem in its own. Then now we have that problem and the original problem of oh my God, I'm nervous. I don't know if I can face people. So one is to fully accept, I'm going to be nervous. I'm going to have a mini panic attack. I might need to throw up. I'm going to be sweating. And that's just going to be a part of the process. I'm going to have to embrace that. I'm going to have to honor that. And I'm going to have to sit in that fear. But I'm going to go ahead anyway. So one is just to accept that. That makes it so much easier. Even saying this out loud already brings my shoulders down. Okay, so I'm going to be freaking out a little bit. Cool. Now that I've accepted it, it's not up to chance whether it's going to happen or not. So every time, just before my name is called, I'm being introduced, I'm and I'm well, we already knew this was going to happen. Okay, cool. Now I'm just going to have to sit with that anxiety. That's all. This is going to happen. I've felt this so many times. I'm not going to push it. I'm not going to resist it. This is not an enemy that's going to attack me. This is not somebody's not going to push me off the stage. This is just inside, and it's a part of me, right? This is a very valid part of me. If I accept the adulation and the adoration of the crowd, if I accept the applause, I gotta accept the anxiety that comes with it, So one is just accepting it, not trying so hard to push it. And second is, how do you deal with it, right? I wish I had what I have today. Back in the day, I grew up pathologically shy, extremely shy. My relatives will tell you, my friends will tell you, like I wouldn't even like maintain eye contact. I was that bad. People gave me a lot of advice. There's a lot of advice on the internet from public speakers and things like that, like including absurd stuff like imagine your audience naked. This is a legit advice, Ramsha, I'm telling you. This is on the internet. And I'm like, what? That makes me 10 times more anxious, man. There is so many suggestions, and some of them work, some of them don't. You have to find your own pace. I'll tell you what works for me and what works for most of the people I teach. And that is first and foremost to own the fact that my story, my presentation deserves to be shared. I own my story. I own what I have to say to this crowd of investors, bosses, interviewers, panel, audiences. My story does not have to be big. It doesn't have to be life-changing. It doesn't have to be super funny. It doesn't have to be great. It doesn't have to be Emmy-winning for it to be told. My story deserves to be told because I deserve a seat at this table.
Wow.
My story isn't better than anybody.
Yeah.
It's not mind-blowing, earth-shattering, but it is a drop in the ocean. This is
It
the
is
ocean.
your story.
It is my story. And I don't have to fight to earn that spot. I don't have to earn people's validation for it to be told. It already exists. My story, my life already has worth, already has value. I'm going to go and I'm going to share it. So owning that made all the difference, because when I was not owning that, I'm like, ooh, if I'm like super impressive, maybe then they will want to listen to me. Oh, if I come across as really confident, then they will want to listen to me. None of that matters. They will want to listen to me because my story deserves to be told. I deserve a seat at this table. No questions.
That is so powerful. So what I derive from this is, again, coming back to the point that you made initially, that you want to share your story for yourself because this is what makes you happy. It takes off load from your shoulders. It gives you peace and satisfaction, and you're doing it because you want to share what you have been through, not necessarily that you are trying to get validation from people around you or from your audience. Is that true?
Yeah, there is something to be said about validation. All entertainers, all performers, everybody who's in even show business, like this is part of the process. Like you lean on the audience's approval of you, audience's applause or laughter or whatever that feedback is. That is legitimate. Like I don't enjoy it as much when I'm like doing my work over Zoom, for example.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Right? Like
Yeah.
I'm seeing you, I hear your laughter, I see your eyes on me, and I'm reading your facial cues, and that kind of like feeds into how I'm talking to you. So it's the same with the audience. So there is something to be said about the validation itself, but that's not the reason why I started it. You know what I mean? Like that can't be the driving force. That's a nice side benefit. The driving force is, man, I need to write this story, or I need to tell this story because I can't not tell this story. I can't not, like do this. I have to live with this. And the way to really process this for me is by writing it, by sharing it, by being vulnerable. And you see the cost of not being vulnerable all around you. People who are keeping it within themselves. And I say this with empathy, how that thing like eats you from within. And we end up projecting it on other people. If we don't process our life by writing it, by sharing it, it's going to show up. It's going to show in different ways. So you get to be vulnerable, or you get to like project it in different ways. You get to bottle it up,
I think in order to be a good storyteller, or maybe to pursue a career or a passion in any of the art fields, you need certain vulnerability. You need to be expressive. You need those emotions within you. You need to be sensitive, right?
Absolutely. And you have to be sensitive with other people's stories,
Right.
And I have had to learn this over years. You have to like be the safe person that people can share their stories to. And me being a storyteller, I'm a story listener and a story collector first, and then I'm a storyteller. So you have to be sensitive with other people's stories, and you have to be able to. Sensitive doesn't mean like super protective. You can make. I make fun of my stories and my life all the time, and people actually like when you like laugh at their past traumas that they have processed. First of all, people like oh please listen to me, and then let's joke about it. Let's talk about it. So, but being vulnerable is the name of the game.
We spoke about storytelling and how stories are created, right? But there's one more very interesting part, and that is finding the right opportunities. How do you find those right opportunities? How do you pitch your stories to different theaters or different groups? How do you get started with that?
Yeah.
How do you find a platform?
How do I find a platform? Yeah. If again, if you are learning how to tell good stories, you have to put yourself out there.
Okay.
I had to do that.
And how do you do that?
For me, I can share my journey as an artist, as a spoken word artist. I had to first start competing in believe it or not, there are storytelling competitions. That's the Moth. I competed at the Moth. I have won the Moth 5 times now. I have won the Grand Slam.
Super impressive.
Yeah, thank you. But like the point wasn't to win it. I didn't even know that you could win it. I just like put myself out there. And the point was to really be vulnerable, not just in my storytelling, but to be vulnerable in my actions, to show up, even with like shaky hands and faltering voice and, not being sure of yourself and just rambling half the story. I had to show up first. I did that and I got some good feedback, and somebody in the audience saw me and they're like, hey, I have an event. Would you like to come perform there? And I was like, cool, I don't have anything better to do. Might as well. And I would go there and somebody else in the audience would take note of me. So to put myself out there, people started noticing me at first and my platform grew. And then over the years, I was like, all these little 5-minute, 10-minute stories that I've written, they are talking to one another. These stories have an underlying link. So I combined them. I created first a one-man show, a solo show called Suitcase Stories. So that creation has to happen. You put yourself out there. There's a creation, then putting yourself out there, then another creation phase. Like, what can I really build? What is it that I have to offer? And that became a package. That became a thing that a show I had to offer. And then I started doing it so you start small. I first did it in a very small black box theater. 30 people capacity, 40 people capacity. And then somebody from Steppenwolf saw that. And then somebody from Second City saw that. And I keep pitching my show, you know what I mean? So, same with my teaching practice. Like, I teach storytelling, like I said. People find me on the internet, or people find me when they see me performing stories, or they hear about me and they reach out like, hey, I would love to learn how to tell better stories. Could you teach me? But other than that, I also teach at university. So, high school teachers, middle school teachers, professors from universities, they see me telling my stories. They hear me on the radio and they're like, would you teach my class? So I'm teaching storytelling curriculum to faculty, to undergraduates, to graduates, to high schoolers, to middle schoolers, to faculty in schools. This is how the practice has just grown over the years.
So it's a whole business.
It's a whole business.
You are an entrepreneur.
I'm basically it was a startup. I just didn't know it was a startup. I didn't know it was going to be a business. I was doing it for the sake of it.
And how important is networking? Because I hear from a lot of people that, okay, you have the talent, but you have to network, you have to make connections, right?
Sure.
So how much has networking helped you?
Yeah, networking, everybody talks about it so much. I take it with a pinch of salt, and hear me what I'm saying here. I'm not saying networking is bad. I'm saying networking is really important. You have to put your art out there. Similarly, you have to put your persona out there. You have to introduce yourself to people. You have to talk to new people. You have to meet new people. But take it with a pinch of salt. The caveat being, you don't have to overdo it. You don't have to like become an influencer necessarily if that's not what you want to do. You don't have to be in front of thousands of people. You have to just be in front of 2 or 3 good people who care for you, who care about your story, and who might have an opportunity for you. So I say this as a person who doesn't enjoy networking that much. I've gotten used to it, but I make sure to not dilute myself and my stories by just like offering to anybody. I will offer it to people who care about me, who show an interest in me and my stories, And some of those people end up being folks who give me opportunities to be like, hey, I've worked for this company. They would love to hear from you. Let's do a storytelling conference. Let's do a 1 hour storytelling training for my employees. So that versus just opening up to everybody. And I don't think that's very smart. And people don't enjoy that either.
Now, this might be a little controversial question,
Bring
but
it
I'm
on.
just gonna go for it.
Do it.
How much money were you making when you started out?
Oh my God. Hardly enough to pay taxes. It was very under the minimum wage. And that's why it's important for having your
Savings?
and also like I had jobs, I worked
Another
with nonprofits. I worked in museums. I still like I after I worked for storytelling as a storyteller full time, I still went ahead and got a job. But this time I got a job that piqued my interest. I didn't get a job just because I wanted to make money. What I'm trying to say here is survival cannot be at question. We have to take care of survival. You can't be figuring out where to get the next meal and then living your dream. This sounds very antithetical to how gurus on the internet give
The
their advice.
movies, the Bollywood movies.
Please, for goodness sake, do not follow that advice. Do not go broke following your dream. There is no heroic
There's no one coming to
message there.
rescue you.
Yeah, please be kind to yourself. Make sure that your survival is not on the line. Make sure that your meals, a roof over your head, some
At
disposable
least you
income is taken care
can you
of.
can take care of your basic
Exactly.
necessity.
Exactly. I have dependent parents back home. I'm not gonna I'm not gonna keep them hungry. You know what I mean? Like I'm gonna make sure they're taken care of. I'm taken care of. My lifestyle is okay, and then I'm gonna first start making money from the thing that I love. That's what I did. I started taking storytelling gigs, and only once that started making me money, that's when I started to take the jump. And the beautiful thing happens, Ramsha. This is where my story comes full circle as of today. Once I took that leap to storytelling, I became a full-time storyteller. I would make my money performing and I would make my money teaching. And I was making as much money as I was making from my job. I was like, I'm feeling so good. I'm feeling so comfortable. Now let's see if there is a kind of job that I like working at. And I found a job that spoke to me. Today I teach high school teachers how to be better teachers. I conduct teacher trainings. I help high schoolers on the west and south side of Chicago from these very marginalized and disenfranchised schools. I help them to connect with businesses, restaurants, art establishments. I am now living my dream job, but that happened only after I took a leap. So I'm still doing storytelling. I'm still teaching storytelling, and my employer is cool with that. But that gave me the luxury to be able to finally decide
To experiment and
experiment.
find
Yeah.
minded
Yeah,
opportunities.
compare this with my first job where I was like, I will do dishes for you. I know I'm in finance, but I will go do a grocery run for you, for my boss. You know what I mean? Like I'll do whatever. But today I'm like, no, I have my standards now. I have my boundaries now because I can afford to do that. So
And you know you're good at it.
and I know I'm good at. If this storytelling gig doesn't work, there are 50 others waiting. If this employer doesn't work, I know there are 50 others waiting. I will make my path because I didn't focus on the job itself. I focused on my skill building first.
Very interesting. I think that's a great way to go about it, because instead of focusing on the job, you focus on making yourself better in every possible way. Last question. What are 3 pieces of advice that you'll give to someone who is starting out and they want to build their career in storytelling or something really similar?
Yeah, that's a good question. 3 pieces, huh? I'll have to limit it to 3.
You can do 5. We have all the
let's
time.
I like a challenge. Okay, let's do this. First things first. Please be kind to yourself. Give yourself some grace, man. It's hard out there. Getting a good job, making a living, it is hard. So you see somebody living their dream and you're like, why can't I be there? I used to
It took them years, sleepless
right?
nights
People
to
are
get
not
to
sharing
that
that.
point.
So even if you see my story and you hear my story, you're like, oh my God, why can't I be like Jitesh or whatever? I don't know if you want to be like me, but if you do, Please know that I didn't come here.
Of course, I'm sure people watching this, including myself, would want to take that inspiration from
You're
you.
very kind. Thank you. Be this kind as you're kind to me. Be this kind to yourself. It is hard. Empathize with yourself. Give yourself grace. Give yourself time. That's the first advice. Second is please invest in what you care about. If something moves you, forget passion, forget dreams. If something moves you and you think you can get better at it, if
Do it.
there is an upward mobility there, oh, I like drawing, but I can get really good at it and I won't lose interest while doing that. I think I'm gonna like tinker with that. Invest time, energy, some money in getting better at something that moves you, that you can get better at. I had to spend a lot of time investing in my writing skills. As a writer, as a teacher, I had to teach a lot of gigs to become a good teacher, to know how to break down a concept. So invest time, money, effort in, other than your job, in something that moves you. And finally, put yourself out there. Don't be in people's faces. Don't be like constantly be a salesperson, but just put yourself out there. When the opportunity comes, when someone asks you, hey, and what do you do? Or what are your dreams? Don't hold yourself back. Reach out to people, talk to them, and once you think you have earned their trust, let them know. Let them know, hey, like if you know a camera person, I'm trying to shoot a video. Or if you know somebody who's booking for a podcast, I would love to talk about my life journey or whatever. You know what I mean? Once you do that, let people know what's on your mind. People are not mind readers. Please give people the opportunity to trust you. If you have an offering, if you have a show, please promote it. Talk about it. You know what I mean?
You have to let people know.
Let people know. How are they going to give people the chance to support you? People want to support you. Give them the opportunity to show up. That's my 3 advices.
Well, this was absolutely incredible and very, very inspiring. I have personally learned a lot from you. I think you as a storyteller, obviously we know your achievements and how well you have done, but also you as a person, as a human being, I think you're so inspiring in that way, that you're all about finding that balance, but also not living a miserable life, and really experiment and try different things to see what works best for you. And I think not many people can do that, so more power to you. It was a pleasure having you, and thanks for such a lovely conversation.
Thank you, Ramsha. I hope to speak to you again and hope to be back. I enjoyed talking to you.
Oh
Talking
yeah,
to your viewers.
definitely. Thank you.